Good morning, afternoon, or evening, ladies and gentlemen, all in crypto here, and welcome back, guys, for another daily cryptocurrency market update. First of all, apologies for yesterday's video getting taken down. It did have a copyright strike. I'm not 100% sure why, although I do know we were talking quite a bit in that video about the corrupt governments that rule over you, your overlords. However, I'm sure it was to do with copyright. Today we've got a lot to get into. I want to look at next week. I want to look at the week prior, obviously with the non-farm payroll, which we addressed yesterday, and how this increases the probability of another rate hike. Now, just because it increases the probability of it and it gives Jerome Powell the backdrop, if he wanted to do another rate hike, to do so, I think where they are with rates, there has to be a reason for them to go higher. And I think the only reason, having a strong job market isn't the reason to go higher with rates. However, high inflation, I think, is. Having a strong job market is just maybe what can give you the backing to do that. The inflationary data is really what's important, because this entire hiking cycle, the entire bear market that we've just gone through, was caused by the Fed's response to inflation. And of course, this is the game. This is the macro game that we're playing at the moment. So right now, we're long and strong Bitcoin. We have upside targets of 35K and then 40K plus. I think you're going to see a 40K Bitcoin this year. I think, going on to the macro now, that the Fed's done with rate hikes and they're going to plateau. We have done lots of looking up what happens when rates go sideways after aggressive hiking. And typically, if you look at the S&P, it does quite well on the back end of that. Now, the stock market is something, the US stock market certainly, is, I think, a harder space to navigate right now than the likes of crypto and gold, which come under this anti-fiat category at such an important time where we are literally seeing, we've got quite a bit to go over, guys. We'll do the technicals, we'll get into next week, and then we'll cover some interesting things take place. Reports of 722 banks reported unrealized losses exceeding 50% of their capital. The US Fed is saying this. So at the point of me saying this, in terms of bailouts and banks going bust, we've succeeded 2008 in terms of money value. So, 400 billion. It's now well over 500 billion today. However, if you look at the M1 supply or the money supply, you've got to really ask yourself the question, well, if there's 10 times as much money as there was back in 2008, then how, money doesn't have the same weight. I'd argue that actually 2008 was worse currently. However, of course, we could be getting into dangerous territory. And I think that this is genuinely good for Bitcoin and crypto. And of course, gold. Gold is approaching or at new all-time highs. Now, it's a dangerous game looking to short gold here. It's an obvious short from a range trading point of view, but if you get this wrong without stop, you're going to get it very wrong. When you've got blue skies ahead of you with charts, typically you will run aggressively, and I can see gold doing that. Now, we know JP Morgan is short gold. However, Stan Druckenmiller is long gold and short the dollar. Gold's at support, resistance, the dollar's at support, Bitcoin's at resistance, and we think you're going to get this kind of overlapping, where you do this, and this is what essentially sideways rates, I think, are going to bring. We've took a position back into the markets that we took at the start of the year. After being out of the markets, people think that we've just got this hodl mentality. I think you should be a hodler when it's time to be a hodler. We're long and strong right now, but we were out of the market. And actually, last year, we're calling shorts all over the place. This is from April when we shorted Luna at $81. Now, I actually had no ideas that Luna was going to collapse. However, we made multiple great short calls, and from an investment point of view, took the majority of our capital out and actually played the FX market in terms of putting it in dollars over BP or euros. So we're not hodlers. We're not. I have not necessarily a preference to the bull or the bear case. Right now we're bullish, and that's our bias. But if there was reason to be bearish, and there are reasons, but the bull argument overweighs it, then we'd be bearish. But we're bullish because we've got technical targets. We took a position before we even had these technical targets based on a number of other things. The stars seem to be aligning. And if you think on a macro point of view, certainly if you look at the 2 years as a kind of guiding light, which I believe it is, I think this is topped. Look what happens with rates, with markets when the 2-year tops. Look what happens when this leads the Fed funds, when the Fed funds go sideways. The markets, in my opinion, are going to do well under these conditions, and that's where we're heading. And I also think, in regards to the anti-fiats, they're going to get a little extra boost because, of course, the very fiat systems that we use, which are a complete scam, by the way, and they've been used to control you. You've been linguistically programmed since you were by the media, by schools, by a plethora of things to think that the reality that you are now living in is one that is correct, whereas the actuality of that is somebody has engineered it for it to be that way. And money is a massive part of that, and the controlling factor of that. Money's nothing more than an ideology. It was Adam Smith that said that. And the fiat systems are exactly that, an ideology. Now, I can see next week being pretty good for crypto because I think you're going to get a lower print. So we've got the CPI next week. So looking at the Forex factory, let's do the IG. We've got US CPI, and it's expected to drop. True inflation currently has US inflation at 3.84. I don't think you're going to get that print. True inflation is typically ahead of the actual inflationary data. I think you're going to get somewhere in the 4s. Potentially, this is going to skew, and support, I think, the Fed pausing. Of course, you've got another CPI before they actually make the next rate decision. But I don't think the Fed's got any more in them. You've got inflation at 5%. If it comes down to 4%, and they're at 5.25 at the moment. So I think they're going to leave it where it is. We think market's going to do well. And I actually think that you're going to have a response from the Fed, which is going to be similar to what they've done with Silicon Valley Bank, which is erase the tightening that they did, or a lot of the tightening that they did last year to bail these banks out. And remember, Bitcoin was created on the back end of all this. We also spoke about how you got the halving coming up. There's a number of reasons why we're bullish on Bitcoin, not just because we have a technical inverse head and shoulders that sees upside. We think across the board, and it's not just looking at the Bitcoin US dollar chart. We've done lots of analysis, Bitcoin gold, Bitcoin SPY, similar position. Altcoins are lagging behind. I do think they will catch up. Stock market did well on Friday, but that's obviously based on Apple's earnings. Coinbase, of course, did well based on their earnings. And we'll see what happens. Gold got hit, but gold's at a very key technical level. Also, you'd have had the downdraft of the non-farm, which should support the dollar, supports maybe another rate hike. However, it didn't really play out that spectacularly for the dollar. I'll be looking into CPI a little bit closer, maybe with the Patreons later, and then we'll look towards it in the week ahead. If anybody does want to join the Patreon, there is a link in the description. You'll find out what I'm buying, where I'm buying, and some closer thoughts of mine on in a community of like-minded individuals. This was something I found interesting. Argentina bans Bitcoin purchases. Government is scared, and it's exercising financial. Okay, it makes sense. If I was the Argentina government and I was on that team, of course I'm not. I'm on crypto and Bitcoin's team. I'm an admirer of Bitcoin. I'm a big ambassador for it, even though I'm not a Bitcoin maxi. I would do the same thing, right? If you've got a currency that you're fighting and struggling with inflation over and credibility over, and then you've got this other thing called Bitcoin, which is probably already bigger than your GDP. I would do the same thing. I'd eliminate the competition. That's how the governments of the world work. They're not for competition. Competition is sin. They get rid of it. So yeah. Yesterday was really quite a dumpy day for the cryptocurrency market. Now I believe, and thank you to some of the Patreon members for highlighting this, that this is to do with Celsius and people being able to withdraw from Celsius. Undoubtedly, people would have sold on the market at a time where the volume for the market is very lackluster. Typically weekends are very boring. Yesterday was a down day. I think this was to do with Celsius. I'm ultimately expecting upside this week. Certainly now that we've got the rate decision over, CPI is going to be a big one. We'll see what happens as a result of it. I think you're going to get a lower print. I don't think it's going to be massively lower, but I think that this is going to discourage the Fed from another rate hike. I think also with the back end of the hashtag banking crisis, it's only going to get worse. I think what we got copyrighted for yesterday was showing a video and it had some music over it. that was showing that and showing the stress actually at this point where we are with banks. And it's all to do with the monetary regime, which I think they're going to have to undo. And I think they're going to try and do that pretty sharpish because they're going to need to. And we know what drives the markets. Liquidity. Liquidity is controlled by the Fed, and their actions are very important. And this is really what we're watching for the macro game. For the sort of crypto-specific game, technically we think Bitcoin looks sound. 40k plus is what we're calling for this year. I think it could exceed that. I think that's a very conservative and modest outlook. I'm not blind to the yield curve and what that's maybe predicting, or is predicting. The yield curve's got 100% accuracy rate thus far. You will have something coming down the line. I just don't think that happens until the point of uninversion. And we think there's this window of opportunities to the markets. You know, when everybody's bearish in regards to calling for downside and, oh, you know, this is happening, a crash is on the horizon, all the headlines are crash, 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 crash. Typically, that's that Michael Burry and bank situation where crash, 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 crash is the banks. It's kind of reverse roles, and it's Michael Burry going, you know, a crash is too obvious at this point, I think. And I think this has to kind of see some resolve, only for people to get that sigh of relief, and then they bring the house of cards down. I think that's very much how this plays, and technically we think that's the case. Rates are going to go sideways. I think a pivot is bearish. Sideways rates is not a pivot, and a pivot's likely going to come on the back end of whatever the yield curve is predicting, and that I do indeed believe isn't coming till later on this year, or potentially next year. You know, we've got a presidential election coming up. So much going on, guys. We'll keep you up to date with it on a daily basis. If you've enjoyed this content, a like is always appreciated. So is a comment. We'll see you on Monday. Lots of great crypto content coming. We're really going to try and spruce up. And if you've got any ideas, let me know in the comment section. The content that we're creating from a production value, we think that the core content is there in terms of the value of what we're delivering. I just think we really need to work on the production and promotion of it. And hopefully you guys can help me on that journey. So let me know in the comments. On that note, I'm going to love and leave you. Have a good Sunday. See you in the next one.